Yes. And again, welcome to the OUX Happy Hour. So what we do here is we have all sorts of speakers from all over the place, experts in information architecture, content strategy, UX, of course, and then also a whole lot of people from the OOUX certification program. So people that have been certified in OOUX and have been really digging into a certain area, a certain niche. And that is Amy for sure. So before I hand it over to Amy, I wrote in my journal this morning all about permissions. You know, instead of working on my come on, admit. There we go. Instead of working on my spirituality, I was writing about permissions this morning. So I just kind of want to read you a little bit of like just some overall thoughts that I have brewing in my head about permissions. Then I'll introduce Amy and she will take it away. So basically, I tried to think about like, what do I know? What do I know about permissions? Because there's a lot that I don't know, but what do I know? So what I know is it boils down to who can do what to what, right? In probably the simplest terms. And I also know that before you design the interface to set up permissions, how users are going to set up all their permissions, how admins are going to figure out who has which permissions, and all the ways that you're going to design to make permissions super clear to all of your users so everybody knows who's got what permissions. Before you do any of that, before you design that, you have to define it. So like everything in UX, and this is a lot about what OUX is about, is doing that definition before you start drawing pictures. So not doing that multitasking, because we all know with multitasking, we basically just do two things worse. So we want to separate the design of how we're figuring out how to grant permissions and revoke permissions. We got to figure out the actual definition of that first. So to define it, and even to document it, however the business wants it to work, and also how the users want it to work. Before we can actually do that and figure out who could do what to what, we first have to define the what's of the system. What are the things that users that we need to regulate access to? So we need to figure out what those objects are. And we just cannot skip this as part of a process. There's so many good reasons to figure out what the things are, what the objects are within this system. That's not what we're here to talk about today. Permissions is just one of so many reasons that we need to define what are the things, because we want to figure out who has access to what things. And on top of that, because permissions are often not as simple as like, oh, these roles have access to these things and these roles have access to these things. It's often that different roles have access to different parts of the things. So some roles have access to these 16 attributes, and this other role has access to these 84 attributes. So what we need to do also before we start designing any interface is we not only have to figure out what the things are, but what are the attributes? What are the pieces of those things? And that has to get really, really clear before we jump into all that complexity of access control to all those individual parts. Is somebody asking a question? So finally, we need to define the who. So who are those groups, the roles that get unique access? So even in attribute-based access control, which I'm pretty sure Amy's going to be talking about, attribute-based access control, ABAC, which I feel like is kind of the direction that OOUX permission control is going to be going in. I still think roles need to be defined. And here's these levels of complexity that kind of float around in my head. So roles can be absolute to the system, meaning you're an admin, like let's take EdTech, for example. You're an admin in the system, or you're a teacher role in the system, or you're a student role in the system. Maybe there's even a parent role in the system. And that's not going to change based on where you are in the system. It's an absolute role. But then there's also roles that are relative to other objects. So I am the owner of this event, but I'm a guest on this event. So my role and my permissions and what I can do to that event depends on, on that relative role. And then there's also relative roles from user to user. So I am a friend of this person, but I blocked this person. So what they can see from me differs based on our relationship. So relationships are really important as well. And then the final thing I'll say, just to kind of just start throwing monkey wrenches out there, is I also feel that there's a lot of intertwinement or even overlap between permissions and privacy. So the privacy for the end user, how do they set up their profile access based on these relative roles? So I think even in Facebook, you can say like a friend to me might be able to see different things than a friend for you. So if you're a very private person, I have everything open on Facebook. If you're a very private person, you might have your friends can only see X, Y, and Z. And then you might have a close friends group. So there's additional layers of complexity there. And determining, who can see, the example I give a lot is, for example, map my runs. So who can see my runs versus who can't see my runs based on the relationships that I have with those different people. So that's another thing that I feel like is something that in UX, we haven't really worked out very well, is what is permissions, what is privacy, how do they interact with each other, and how do we make it really, really clear to the end user? So I would say when I'm going through life and interacting with technology, I would say about 80% of the things that I deal with is going to be either like a masked object, a shapeshifter, a broken object, or an isolated object. Those are the things, those 4 horsemen of the internet apocalypse that I talk about all the time. It's usually one of those things. The other 20% of the time, it's permissions problems. I don't either understand what my permissions are, or I don't understand when I give somebody permissions, what that means. I feel like I'm often kind of like muddling through the dark. So those are my kind of high level thoughts on permissions. I'm super excited to see what Amy has to say about it. So Amy White, I'm excited to hand it off to her. She is a UX designer and a certified OUX strategist who loves helping people understand things. And I'm really excited for her to help us understand permissions. So she's been an educator, a writer, an engineer, and a small business owner. So Amy, take it away.
All right, thank you. I think, you have to stop sharing sound for me to start sharing my story.
Are you sure we don't want to listen to Permission to Love again before you get started?
No.
Okay, you're good? All right, you're good. Stop share. Big red button at the top, stop share.
Okay. Oh, I see, there we go. All right. How's that?
Looks good.
Cool. All righty. We're going to take a deep dive into how the ORCA process can help you think through permissions in a complex system before designing any screens. I'll present a technique that I came up with to document which users can do what to objects and their attributes. And this thinking is really a work in progress because OOUX is still evolving. So we're in uncharted waters here. And I'm feeling a little vulnerable putting this out there because I don't have it all figured out. It's not super polished, and it's just going to be lots of food for thought. So I'm hoping for a lively discussion afterward. All righty. Here's me. I love nerding out on the details, also thinking about the big picture and getting things done. So here we go. We often use the words privacy and permissions interchangeably. Privacy might mean who can see something, or does the app collect and sell your data? Permissions could mean who can do something, or do you want the app to be able to use your location, etc. So in this project, I'm talking about who can see or do something. Access control is another word that I came across that maybe describes it better and is used to talk about these concepts in the information security world. So here's a little theory. These are 2 modern models for access control. Many products use a combination of the 2. Role-based access control is generally easier to implement, but it has limitations. Attribute-based access control is considered as more work to implement upfront, but can be more flexible, fine-grained, and scalable as your system grows. It's also called policy-based access control because you set policies for who can do what based on resource attributes, user attributes, and environmental attributes like time of day or user location. So I'm going to present a hypothetical project that I use for my OOUX certification in cohort 1 that gets into some of this thinking. Obviously, permissions are a huge topic, and I'll present one way to approach it. I'm still trying to reconcile it with these models, so I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts. Feel free to put questions and comments into the chat while I'm talking. All right, here's another way to think about it, whatever you call it. I'm going to keep calling it permissions. There are a lot of different aspects to this problem. Permissions are very multifaceted. Here are a few random examples from Sophia, like all my runs are private, never show these. Different types of systems, like an ed tech or a run or a medium type article stuff. So who sets visibility? Is it based on user roles, or can individual users choose who can see things? The object's visibility could be controlled by the system based on the user's role, or by the user for objects they own. Do you want visibility to, and then another level, do you want to set visibility for all instances or just one instance of the object? Like this article is private, where other articles are visible to the world. Then maybe you want to set visibility of attributes on those objects based on role. Or maybe the user who created the object can set the visibility of certain attributes, just certain attributes individually. So actually there's another whole dimension to this, which is who can create, edit, and delete these things and even do other actions to them, which you might want to set permissions for separately. So these are problems that teams can spend many hours untangling after the product is halfway built. So here's a project where I try to put some of these ideas into practice. I wanted to make Google Maps more useful for planning trips with other people. Google has two different products for trip planning, My Maps and Save Places. Both are really useful, just limited in different ways. And of course, these were probably created by different teams at different times. So this project is just to imagine, what if we could go back and fix them up to make one really great app? This project was all about adding more social collaboration, and that sparked a lot of thinking about how permissions for how people can collaborate. So Mind Maps is great for creating customized maps, but the interface for building a map has some confusing aspects like masked objects, broken objects, all the things. You cannot create these maps on mobile, and it doesn't really even work well for a viewer on mobile. Save Places is great because it's right there in the Google Maps app, but it's not perfectly integrated. There's things you think you're going to be able to do, but then you can't. So, and then neither one allows any social interaction within the app. People use these trip planning products in many different ways. Here is one use case using Saved Places. So say you're planning a trip with several family members. There's going to be lots of negotiation about what you're going to do. The list owner and editors can add pins on mobile while you're on the trip. Awesome. But you can't share or save routes between those places, like an itinerary for the day. It would be great to discuss and prioritize activities through comments right in the app. Tons of permission questions. Do you want collaborators to be able to edit or delete things created by others? Currently, they can. I don't want my father-in-law to delete places that I had added to the list, but it would be great if he could add a note that says maybe he's not as interested in this place. That's fine. Another use case, wedding weekend. Your friends coming from all out of state, you want to show them your favorite brunch spots, scenic drives. My Maps can also share routes, which Save Places can't do. My Maps is great for this because as the host, you create this map, you send a link to share it with a specific group of people who are viewers, and they can't add or delete pins, or maybe you want them to. So what could make this even better? If viewers could make plans through comments on pins and even share photos of themselves having a great time at the places you suggested, it might be cool if viewers could create and share their own routes and maybe share them with just a few others. A map owner needs to be able to set these permissions. One more use case, a public map. It's not collaborative, but wouldn't it be great if people could make their own tags or comments on the places or the route, or even add their own private pins, like the donut shop you're going to go to after the race? Or, you wouldn't want everybody to see these, right? But it would be cool if they could share with a few other viewers, like their team for the race or their family that they're doing this tourism route with, like the farm stand tour or the winery tour or something like that. All right, here's how object-oriented UX can solve these problems. We're going to make the interface more intuitive by making objects recognizable, manipulatable, and well-connected. And we're going to make sense of the complexity of relationships and permissions. So here's the methodology of OOUX. ORCA is an iterative process of defining objects, relationships, CTAs, and attributes. I'm going to focus on the second round, diving deep into the detailed requirements for all these parts of the system. So I came up with this diagram of how I'd like the system to work for a great trip planning app, different from how it works now. In my system, there are 6 major objects, each with a unique relationship to the others. The pin is the heart of the functionality. Each pin has one user that created it. Each user has 0 to many pins they created. Each pin appears on one map. Each map has 0 to many pins. Pins can appear on 0 to many routes. Pins can have 0 to many comments. Routes can have comments on them too. This is what a pin looks like now on my maps. You can choose a name. It doesn't have to be the name of the restaurant. You can just call it my favorite Italian place, and you can add a description, but it doesn't bring in the place data that's so great from Google Maps. So then wouldn't it be nice if other people could add comments saying, I like the lasagna here, or let's go there Thursday night. Here's what a pin looks like in saved places. It does bring in the place data, and the creator can add a note. Wouldn't it be great if other people could add notes too, or comments or photos? So it's super important also that you should be able to add it to a route with other pins from the list, not have to relook up your places that you want to make a route to. All right, the heart of ORCA is the object map. If you've done the certification, this will look familiar. If you've taken one of the shorter workshops, this is a bit more sophisticated way to keep track of all the objects and their attributes. Each column is an object with color-coded metadata, content chunks, and nested objects showing relationships. Attributes and nested objects are listed in priority order, so sketching is easy once you work all this out. Time invested here saves time later. And wrangling complexity with this object map can help you make a more powerful product by capturing all these ideas so you can discuss them with stakeholders and developers and make intentional choices upfront about what users can do. So the pin has attributes like pin color, name, description, maybe tags like Monday plan or mom's recommendations. It's got one user that owns it, 0 to many routes that it appears on, 0 to many comments on it. User has a name, photo, bio, a role for this map. That's a key aspect of permissions. A route has a name, description, transportation mode, a user that created it, 2 to many pins on it because you can't have a route with just 1 pin. The map has a title, description, a user that created it, 0 to many editors and viewers. And the place is the root object of a pin. It's a set of coordinates with data about what's there, and it exists on every map. The pin is the instance that a user adds to the map with their own description, but if they delete the pin, the place still exists. Finally, I want to make this social. So this is my aha moment. Comment needs to be its own object because it has structure and its own attributes. It has one user that created it, 0 to many pins or routes that it appears on. So getting organized. Next tool for getting deep into the details. The CTA matrix looks at who can do what to all the objects and their attributes, why, when, and where. So this is where I started to get down some thorny questions. Who can create a pin? This is set by the user's role for the map. So owners or editors create pins, viewers don't. Or maybe they do. Maybe we need another role here. So are all pins visible to all viewers? Should users be able to keep all of their pins private or just certain pins? Like this pin can only be seen by me. You probably want the map owner to be able to set whether users can create private pins. And that's probably a property of the map. Can people other than the creator of the pin edit its attributes? Should users be able to set permissions on attributes? Can a user keep the descriptions in all their pins private? So description is an attribute. Can they keep all those descriptions private, or can they keep the description private for individual pins? Complicated. Going back to Sophia's diagram from the beginning, object visibility means who can see the pins. Attribute visibility means who can see certain metadata, like the tags on those pins. User controlled refers to instance of an object like pin that are owned by that user. Like all my pins are private, nobody else can see them. Instance specific refers to instances of an object like pin that are owned by that user. Hold on, I got lost a second. Instance specific visibility is set by the user that created the instance. Sorry. I want this pin to be private, only visible to me. All right, this only addresses visibility. What about other actions? Do you want to set routes created by you to be edited but not deleted by others? And who sets these permissions? The owner of the pin, the owner of the map, or the system? So the point is, it's not merely about who can see objects, but who's doing things to them. And those might need to be defined even separately from the visibility. So this could be influenced. It could be influenced by the setting on some other object. So I set up this system to try to track some of the permissions in my object map. This is a great way to map all the possibilities in a structured way, so you can be intentional in what you choose. I created custom fields to capture permissions on each card. Trello works well for this. You could use other platforms. A state is an attribute with choices. For example, pin color could be red, orange, yellow, green, blue. A role is a state for the user relative to the map. You might be the owner of one map or an editor on another. So the state of one object relative to another object determines permissions. Here's what the card looks like. Users can also have different roles for a pin. They can be the owner or the viewer of the pin. For example, description is an attribute of the pin. The visibility is set by the pin owner, and it can only be created, edited, or deleted by the pin owner. So this is a simpler example. This is just recognizing intersections, exposing ideas, trying to document them. We don't know if this is the best way. It's just one way I tried. Here are the fields I created. We can use them on objects or attributes. So set object permissions or set attribute permissions. Object visibility, attribute visibility. So for a pin on the map, you could have the pin owner set the visibility. So you could create a private pin. A pin is not required. A map doesn't have to have any pins at the beginning. A pin could be created by anyone, viewer, editor, or owner of the map. It can only be edited by the pin owner. Although, what does it mean to edit this object? Really, maybe that means editing its attributes. So, food for thought. It can only be deleted by the pin owner. Like I don't want my father-in-law deleting the pins that I put on the map. Or the map owner, because if somebody puts something inappropriate on the map, then I guess you wouldn't want to have lost control of that, right? So, but not other editors or viewers. Other editors or viewers cannot delete my pins. And this is an example of different permissions for create, edit, and delete. And maybe the map owner sets up whether this feature is enabled. All right, coming back to comment, because that's what my goal was all about. The visibility of the comment is set by the comment owner. And can be created by anyone. edited by comment owner, deleted by comment owner. So this is just a way that ORCA object mapping can help you not miss some opportunities for things that could benefit a user. This is a skill that we could develop further, and I'm still working on it. In lots of projects, it would not get this complicated. Plenty of projects, this one just happened to be a real gem for permissions. Plenty of projects, we never even thought about permissions on a lot of the content, you know, just, yeah, a lot of apps don't get this detailed. But if you need to, ORCA is a great tool to find different ways to document it. All right, so you got to get down to the final sketches, right? We're getting into sketching. I did these sketches really fast, and I did not go, this is a hypothetical project. I did not go to wireframes. This is the end. Sketches, I did these sketches so fast because I go down the list of attributes on my object in each column from the Trello board, and I reuse the pieces everywhere they appear. So if I designed the place module off in another sketch, and when I need it in the pin, I just bring it in, drop it in there, so that it looks the same everywhere it appears. Same with the pin list in the route. I have a list of pins that are on the route. I just pull that information in from my pin sketch. So I have a smaller version of the pin, a little like list version card that I would just drop in there. The comments list card, I actually, on the left side on the pin, I designed the comments list in there. I could have designed that separately. But when I use it on route, I drop it in and it looks just the same. It's the same as it was on the other one. So that avoids shapeshifter objects. And there's a couple, I just put arrows to point out a couple little places where you can see that it's visible to these people, but not visible to those people. Or you can set a setting for private, public, or select users. So if you've defined these things in your object map before you ever get to sketching, then you know what to do, and it goes fast. Wow, I guess I zoomed through it really fast. This took me 30 minutes at home. Okay.
Oh, good. That's awesome. So
yeah, I just hope this was a good overview of how OOUX can help make sense of complexity around permissions. And we've enjoyed exploring this space and bouncing around ideas on the Object-Oriented UX forum, and just, surfacing ideas, talking with stakeholders, developers, making intentional choices and prioritizing, because every attribute is a feature that costs you money.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Oh, and I have discussion questions.
Ooh, questions for us. What about questions for you?
Yes, questions for me. Okay.
Let's see if anybody has questions for you. And then, yeah, these would be, these are going to be great discussion questions. Maybe we can even do a breakout room. I'm going to show some stuff that I've been working on too, which is also work in progress. But yeah, I mean, using those custom fields within Trello, I mean, Amy took it farther than I've seen anybody take it, but I can see that working really well. I mean, if you are dealing with something that requires that amount of detail, this could be a really great methodology for you, as opposed to maybe a spreadsheet or something else you may have looked into using. An object map with a ton of custom fields where you can basically add metadata to your metadata, and determine permissions, visibility, what actions can be taken on different, not only objects, but their individual little bits and pieces. So what kind of questions do you guys have for Amy, for me, for any of the other? And it's totally fine. If we have a question, ask it, and then anybody can really answer it. What do you guys want to know? I have a quick question that's just, I mean, it's more of like a tactical question, but on your custom fields, is there a reason that you use text fields instead of drop downs for permission?
Oh, yeah. Because I was still evolving the choices. Yeah, I hadn't quite settled on choices. And so then once I created it for all the cards everywhere, then if you change the format of the field to a dropdown, you lose all the information you already entered. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
As I refine this, I would like to create more standardized dropdowns.
Yeah, I mean, I could see like forever you would have a create, edit, delete, and then a drop down on who can do that for each of them. Cool. So
I did a drop down for the first one, which was like visibility set by map owner or visibility set by object owner, or visibility set by system. I forget what the drop downs were, but that one, it was more clear.
Yeah. So, okay. So does anybody have any, I am going to show you, I have a mural board queued up here that I'm going to show you guys, some toasters and some staplers, and some chicken scratch of mine, of just like how I've been trying to think about this, and also some stuff that I've been doing in Trello that is not quite as detailed as what Amy's been doing. But before we get into that, does anybody have any like, just, I mean, maybe it's not a question, but like, this is what I'm dealing with as far as permissions at work. Do you guys have any thoughts on it? War stories?
Also, did I go too fast? Because I could go back.
I don't feel like you were talking too fast.
I think this is really cool because, I mean, having discussed the OUX with some people who didn't know about it and describing it to them, this is what the thing that kind of came up the most was like granular permissions as being kind of a big topic. And I think that this kind of thing will crop up in places that you wouldn't even expect, you know, because that's the thing that lurks in the shadows and gets you in the end. So I think this is really awesome that you have this way to document it. I'm just wondering if there's a way, because the documentation is amazing, but I mean, I was wondering if there's a way to better visualize permissions for people. I mean, because, you know what I mean? Just a better way to kind of like visualize it. Because I can see if I dig into each one of those object cards, I can kind of see, or, you know, attribute cards, I can see what the permissions are like. But is there some other, I don't know if there is or not, but if there's some other way to kind of like look at this.
You know, I actually read a really great article by a couple of computer science professors about visualizing attribute-based access control. I'm going to look it up and put that link in the chat. It was really interesting. It used this like circle packing diagram to show permission policies, and it was super fascinating. Let me look at that.
Yeah, and you had a bunch of articles in the forum. Maybe you can paste some of those articles in as well.
That's what I'll do. I'll post all of those.
Cool. So while you do that, I'm going to share my screen real quick to show you guys what I've been working on. Show and tell. And honestly, like, then we can just open up the floor. And if there's anything else like you guys want to show, as far as what you've been working on, then that'd be cool. Let's just do this desktop one. Okay. I don't know. I'm just like cracking myself up a little bit. So question from John. Any recommendations when your application is mostly using role-based permissions, but you start finding attribute-based permissions lurking their way in, and there are exceptions and overrides to the rule-based permissions?
That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, if you're already in role-based permissions, then is there a way to like work around and start doing attribute-based permissions? I don't have a good answer to that because I still need to read up on the difference between them. That's gonna be something that, like, if we can go back to that slide where you show the role-based versus the attribute-based permissions, and maybe we can like just walk through that to really understand the difference. Because this won't take me that long. This is just kind of silly. But so basically what I did, so this was actually, do we have any Honeywell people here? Put it in the chat if there's any Honeywell people here. So this is from a conversation with some folks at Honeywell. So this is loosely based on some stuff that they were working on. I don't think I'm doing any kind of IP, but basically Honeywell does a lot of stuff with like factories, right? So what I was thinking of is, okay, let's take a place, and we're going to have a building, and we have the first floor, the second floor, the third floor. And then within those floors, there's rooms. And at this, maybe it's not a factory. Maybe this is a place where office workers and bakers hang out. And bakers can only use toasters, and office workers can only use staplers. Okay. So we have 3 objects that basically we need to control access to. We have floors, we have rooms, and we have tools. And a floor is going to have lots of rooms. A room only has 1 floor. Okay. And then the room, you need to be able to get access to that room. Like if I have access to the 3rd floor, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have access to these rooms, right? Okay. So you have to, but I can't get access to this room without getting access to this floor first. Or if I get access to this room, does it automatically give me access to this floor? Because I got to like, walk by these 2 toasters and this stapler anyway. So maybe we set it up like that. So if I get access to room A3, I've automatically, maybe the system tells me, it says, hey, when you give this person access to A3, you're also giving them access to the 3rd floor. Okay. So that's the type of complexity I've created for myself. And then we have the tools. So tools, we have 2 types of tools. We have toasters and staplers. They have 0 to 1 rooms because some of them aren't in a room. Some of them are just like out there in the lobby or something. They also, if they have 0 to 1 floors, if 0 rooms, if the room is 0, then they must have a floor. Okay. So a little bit of a weird inheritance going on there. And then they have their level of, are they at orange level? Okay. So the black is default. And then we have orange level ones, which like you have to be special to get access to the orange ones. So, and I was thinking about the roles. Okay. So we have the baker. The baker can see and use toasters. And if they're the owner, they can set the schedule. So the hours of availability. So only the owner of a certain toaster can actually say when other people can use that toaster. And then an office worker can see and use staplers, and the owner can set the schedule. Then we also have a mechanic, and a mechanic can see, use, edit, and hide all tools, completely overriding availability. So if a stapler is out of commission, they should be able to say like, no, this isn't available anymore because it needs to be fixed. And then we have an admin, and then we also have orange level bakers and orange level office workers. And they can see and use not only the black toasters, but also the orange toasters. And orange level office workers can also see the black and the orange staplers. All right. So how do I go in and start figuring out like how to design, like if this is the use case, right? So I'm going to just build out my object map a little bit more because I kind of got distracted. I got distracted over here. I'll get into that in a second. So let's say I have a room, and I also have, we have users. And those users have a type. Well, let's give them a name. There's a name. So we have name, and then we have type, and it's not toaster and stapler, it's baker and office worker. And then they have whether they're orange level or not. So that is shared between the tools and the users. But I'm not going to say like, these are all the tools that they have access to. Like I would, like part of me is like, okay, here has, well, maybe I can, but it would happen automatically. So has at least one, right? Has 1 to many tools owned. And also has, I don't really know where this is going, guys. We're gonna go on this trip together. Has 1 to many tools accessible to them. And I kind of want to say, I want to dig into here and think, okay, what is this actually based on? So this is going to be based on the ownership is given by admin. The admin is the one that says like, okay, this person owns this and this person owns that other one. And then the ones accessible to them based on, let's say based on level, and room/floor access. And then we have floors, and then we have has zero to, we'll say 0 to many, because we can have a floor with nobody that can have access to it. 0 to many users with access, and rooms is the same, 0 to many users with access. And this is also given by admin. So this is kind of how I would start sort of breaking down the permissions in an object map. But I still haven't gotten into like, okay, how do you set availability? But what I could do is I could have, we're running out of room here. Let's move our object map down here. So under tool, I might also have as metadata, the schedule. And I'm just going to put this as one card. There's a little bit more, there would be a little bit more in here, like breaking down available, currently available, yes, no, but we'll just do availability. Be a little bit lazy with that one. And that one is set by owner. Okay, so now I've captured that truth, right? That we have tools and they have schedule and availability, which is set by the owner. Okay, so that's sort of how I would start working it out in an object map. And then when you can start going into Trello and add additional detail in there, or like instead of just doing it as these, parentheses, you could actually start doing the custom fields and get a lot more granular. Okay, that's that show and tell. So over here, here's some stuff that I was thinking about how to kind of like put the call to action matrix on steroids. So this idea of what can be done. So you have the office worker, that's the default, and then the office worker, that's orange level. And then you have staplers and toasters. Okay. So if I look at the toasters, I can see that and the office workers can other stuff here. So not only do I have staplers and toasters, I have staplers black versus staplers orange. And then I have the relationship to that object. So owner.stapler black, owner.stapler orange, default.stapler black. So just one that I'm either an owner or I'm not an owner. Default.stapler orange, owner.toaster black, owner.toaster orange, default.toaster orange, default.toaster black. No, I mixed those up. And then thinking, okay, for our different roles for office worker, and you'd also do this, of course, for baker as well. So I'd have baker default and then baker orange, and then really list all the things that can be done in those intersections. So if I'm office worker black level, then I could see, and I'm the owner of an owner, I can be an owner of a black stapler. I can see it, I can use it, I can edit, I can set schedule. So I started trying to put like all the available calls to action basically in that cell, which may or not be the best way to do that. So another way to do this, so here's another, like I have office worker, black versus orange, a baker, black versus orange. And then I also had mechanic, black versus orange, and then admin. And then thinking about how to like break down all of the different, the toasters and the rooms, and whether it's mine or owner, or I'm just looking at it. So that's one way to do it. But then I was thinking, would it actually be better to put the calls to action across the top? So have the different permutations of an object, and then all of that's basically as far as I got. And then really just like pivoting the table. So you have all the permutations of your tools and then all the potential actions, and then showing who can do it. So it would show basically the same information, but flipping what's on the x-axis and what's in the intersections of the cells. That's my show and tell.
Yeah. That's kind of like a modified object action matrix in a way, right? Which is very, I mean, it's like a natural extension of that pattern, right?
Yeah, it's basically blowing it out. So instead of just, you basically, you're blowing out your roles that we do in object, and what we do in the CTA discovery, we have our roles and then we have our objects. And this is just saying like, okay, instead of just your objects, show all the different permutations of objects and potential relationships that users can have with those objects. And then what you would do is you would continue on with rooms and floors and just build on that. It wouldn't be like this like crazy intersection.
Right. Well, I'm thinking of, from the UX Magic book again, I was thinking of that he has that object action matrix where he has objects on the left and actions across the top. And then there's an X where that action applies to that object. And he uses that to sort of narrow down the cognitive load by like eliminating things that are overlapping or whatever. But he'll have like a capital X and then a small x. So he'll have different levels of like whether that's important or not or whatever. But I think that's totally like a perfect place, where you could expand that cell to kind of like add those other permissions, like you were saying. You know what I'm saying? I think that's a real that one looked like the best pattern. I mean, from a visual perspective.
So who else here has done some work on permissions, and like just out of curiosity, like how different is this, or do you feel like this is something that could be useful, or is it like, oh, what I was doing before is working just fine? Anything that you can give back to us to say like, oh, actually, this has worked really well.
I wish I had something that had worked really well that I could recommend. We have a situation where we had a nice simple 3 roles, very easy to control everything, right? And then it turns out, well, really one of the roles people should be handled differently. And instead of saying, okay, let's split the roles because that's ugly, now we put a attribute based on top of that. And so based on this attribute, we're going to treat them differently. But no, it couldn't be an attribute that has 1 value. It's now got 4 different values. So, and people got concerned about, oh, if we have more than 4 values, it's really going to drive us nuts. So then we added a completely separate, different way, which the best way I could put it, it's a third alternative. It's like we hung another entity out here. Another object says, this is the permission object. And that is a junction object, which would link up whatever permission is created with whatever user it's attached to. But of course, it only gets attached to certain people with certain roles. So I'm now at the point where I'm thinking, I may have to take this to a 3rd level, because we've created this monster that could then be individual level, not even based on an attribute. And I'm afraid at some point the values can be something other than yes and no. It's going to be, well, here's your level of permission based on it. That becomes a true junction object. And that's where I'm afraid we're going to get lost.
When it's like, when it's complicated to us as the designers, you basically know it's going to be complicated for your end users. Like if it's hard for you to think about in your own head, and we expect people to just understand. And yeah, is anybody working with, and John, maybe you said this, but is anybody, John or anybody else, have in your application permission groups? Like where an admin like creates a new permission group, like create new permission group, and then they have like all the ticky boxes, and they're like, okay, this is what this permission group can do. Okay. And then they add people to that permission group.
Definitely not exactly, although the latest thing we added, I think, starts getting closer to that. I mean, the reason we've kind of developed the way we are is to add a new permission group. It's a programming request, and it's a whole lot of code. And it's refactoring time, but there's no time for the refactoring.
Yeah, I mean, basically a permission group is like an end user generated role, like the admin role can create new roles within the system and decide what that means within the system. I've seen that at some applications that I've worked on, and it seems like it creates a lot of headache. It seems like nice and clean when you're doing it. You're like, oh, just create this new role and figure out all the things that role can do and add people to that role. But it seems like it turns into sort of a maintenance nightmare. And then like knowing like what are the roles, just in any way, shape, or form, if we can avoid the sea of ticky boxes, the grid of ticky boxes, I would love to see an interface that does that.
May I?
Yeah.
In Drupal, for example, there is such a role-based UX where you have the default roles are an anonymous user, authenticated user, and administrator. And then you have an endless page of checkboxes where you can, well, the administrator has all checkboxes checked, and the other roles, you can go granular on each module with certain tasks, and UX-wise, it's horrible.
Yeah.
As well as from a page performance perspective as well, because you get, I don't know how many 100 checkboxes on one single page.
Do you work on Drupal stuff? Do you use Drupal?
I use Drupal, but I haven't worked on that.
Can you pull up? I would love to see that screen.
Yeah, I could.
Okay, awesome. So when you're pulling that, Amy, you want to run through this real quick, and then Ralph, I'll make you co-host so you can screen share for us.
So yeah, so role-based access control is this is like real kind of familiar, right? You can have a user can have multiple roles. You can be a I don't know. There's like different role titles, and each role has a different set of permissions, and they define.
Do the ed tech, like teacher, student, principal, or something like that, right? Would that be an example of roles?
So yeah, and if the principal teaches a class, maybe they're a teacher as well. You can hold multiple roles, or like Airbnb, the host can be going to another as a visitor, right?
Right.
So, and the permissions are given for the role, and you just assign a user to that role, and you can give them multiple roles. They don't have to have just one role, I guess. And then attributes access control is also known as policy-based access control because John, what you were saying reminded me of this, having like a permissions engine kind of thing, like separately, because that's kind of what the policy thing does, is it has a list of policies, and it basically like takes a situation and puts it into the policy engine and says, is this true? Is this true? Okay, then yes. Is this true? Is this true? No. So then it's the thing that decides. It's the decider. There's a little unit that's the decider somehow in this system that takes resource attributes, subject attributes, user attributes, and environmental attributes, and it sets a rule. If these three things are true, then this action can happen. If only two of them are true, the action cannot happen. And then there's that article, which was so fascinating, about visualizing those relationships. And they created a tool that actually, maybe I can even share that. Where's that article? It's so that they actually did usability testing for system administrators, or whatever they called it. They tested it out on computer science students. I can't type and talk at the same time.
Especially when you have like 20 people watching you.
I know, right? Here it is. Okay, so they created these circle diagrams that represent the policies.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is true and this is not true, then or if this is undefined and this one is true, then yes. And if it has this policy, if patient disagrees and hospital agrees and surgeon agrees, then the policy is this, then such and such gets access. And then it even has like more complicated ones where it's got, I guess there's different rules you can make, atomic rules and binary policies. And it's, so it's this, this thing they created and tested that actually helped security professionals that are responsible for doing this, for implementing these policies, to visualize them and made them feel more comfortable. That people, the security professionals felt better about their understanding of the policy, felt more confident in implementing the policy if they could visualize it. So this was fascinating, and I didn't fully understand it, to be honest. But I was like, I want to check this thing out.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. Do you have that?
Yeah, that's the first link that I posted in the chat.
Okay, beautiful. All right, awesome.
So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that this type of visualization is needed to understand it, though, is like, I wonder, like, at one point, how much it's our job as UX designers to even push back on business requirements of like, nobody's going to understand this. We've got to simplify this. Is this like, are we making this more complicated than what it needs to be? I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but that's probably something we should also be thinking about. Like, are we overcomplicating permissions? Because when you complicate it so much, then it's not going to be useful. Ralph, Amy, I think you have to unshare. And Ralph, do you want to show us the Drupal mess? And you're on mute if you're talking.
Yeah. Well, you have basically on the list. If I would click on the list item tab, I can't at the moment because it's in a Docker instance and my computer is too old and slow, so I stick to the permissions page. Well, basically the roles are just labels, and there you have anonymous user, authenticated user, and administrator. And the list of permissions is based on the list of activated modules. So the list could grow longer the more modules you activate. And now you see administrative user is activated per default on every checkbox, but for the rest, you see you have a click matrix more or less. And it's overwhelming much reading, and if you have more rows, then it gets more complicated, and it's granular and powerful, but overwhelming.
And so what we're seeing as a list of actions, right? Display.
And capabilities.
Okay. So capabilities and also visibility based on the module. And the module is not necessarily an object. Like some of these look like objects like file and comment, but filter, that's not really an object. And the way that we define it in OOUX is like,
no.
So yeah, wow. Okay. Awesome.
You see, it's long.
Oh my gosh, it just keeps going.
Yes.
And so under role, you could add a role?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go, for example, on the role side, you could not take it in some sort of administrator and writer or whatever, but you could say, narrow it down to a certain task that you name it, for example, the ability to, for example, add blog posts that you use for that role. You add the permission to edit the blog post, to delete a blog post, and so forth. So you get more granular, and that a single user hasn't a single role, but several. That is a
I've been wondering, like, so I don't know if there's any, well, I do know there's probably a few Webflow users here, but like, I know I've just been thinking about, because Webflow right now doesn't have any permissions really. Like you're either an editor or a designer within a Webflow website. But I mean, because Webflow is so object oriented, I've always wondered like how easy it might be for them to just say like, who can edit what object, and then put it on, I mean, each individual attribute on the object, just say like, who can edit this. Anyways, cool. Thanks for sharing. Awesome, guys.